Hi Year 5 and welcome to your English lesson. So we're going to be looking at a new skill today that I don't think you've ever looked at before, okay? So we're going to look at using amplification techniques in our writing. Maybe thinking, what on earth is amplification? So I'm going to walk you through the lesson today. So we're going to look at the 5 senses to describe a setting. So we're going to link this to a specific part of our video today. Then we're going to have a go at defining what amplification is and how it's used in writing so that we can understand how to use it and how best to use it in writing and why we use it. And then once we've had a go at looking at the different forms of amplification, you're going to have a go at writing your own paragraph using the skills you learned today. So what I want you to do is I've got these 3 pictures up in here, but I'm not going to say anything about them just yet. But what I would like to do is go back to the original video, that's our video called The Piano, and I want you to watch the little scene that starts at 48 seconds in, and it goes for about 20 seconds until it gets to 1 minute and 9 seconds. What I want you to do is just watch that short 20-second clip, and then come back to this video. Okay, so I've taken these as screenshots from that part of the video, so I wonder if we can infer some information about what we think this gentleman did when he was in the war. I wonder if you've spotted it. Okay. So before I explain to you what it is that I want us to have a look at today, we can see that our gentleman, okay, obviously is from the army. And we know from that little snippet that obviously he was in the war. So I've got some war pictures on here, and what I want you to do is I want you to see if you can fill out this table, maybe with only 2 or 3 words, depending on how many you can come up with, of what, through those 5 senses, a soldier might have experienced in the war. So I want you to think about things that you might have been able to see, things that they might have been able to hear, what things they would have been able to smell, would they have been able to taste anything, specifically things that might also be in the air, what would they be able to touch? So just want you to pause the video for 5 minutes and just jot down some ideas of those 5 senses of how they might have experienced those when they were fighting in the war. Okay, well, I came up with some examples of my own, but only a short list to show you, okay? So things that they might be able to see, they'd see lots of soldiers. They'd see soldiers from their side of the army and from the other side. They'd potentially see a lot of dead bodies. Okay, because they're in a war and there's lots of weaponry and guns and bombing going on, there's going to be lots of dead bodies. They might see lots of fighter planes if they've got the RAF. Okay, obviously the RAF is the Royal Air Force. But if he was fighting for a different country, they'd have their Air Force planes in the air as well. You'd see all the crumbling buildings. I mean, look at this picture. This once must have been a city or a town, and it's just been completely reduced to a pile of rubble. And they potentially would have seen lots of things like smoke and fire, okay? If they've got lots of bombs coming down and gunfire and things going off and exploding, that creates that fire reaction, doesn't it? And then it sets fire to things and it burns. They're also going to see a lot of people running around, because don't forget, although they're in the army and they're fighting, you've got civilians around, you've got the people who live in those towns and cities who are also going to be destructed by this war. They might be able to hear screaming, people crying, there'll be explosions, you'll hear gunfire, bombs going off, you'll be able to hear the fighter jet planes going through the air. You'll be able to smell lots of burning, okay? And not only would you smell burning and then have that smoke that's going to go up your nose and it's going to go hit you right at the back of the throat, but also the idea of rotting flesh. Obviously in a war, there's lots of fatalities, lots of casualties, people die. No one's going to be picking up those bodies for a really long time, so they might potentially just be sat there rotting or even burning if they've been caught, you know, in some form of gunfire. Now, things they might be able to taste, you'd actually taste that smoke. When it hits into your nose and it hits right at the back of your throat, it's quite a bitter taste that goes through it in your mouth. So if they're going to be around on the ground, they're going to be getting a lot of that smoke in there. Now here, they might get lots of rubble and mud because obviously everything's going to be flying up and flicking off, and that might be something they end up getting into their mouth. But they might also even find they end up tasting blood. Now that could be that maybe they've wiped their face or they've carried a body and they've got the blood on it, or they're injured themselves and blood's dripped in through their mouth, or it's dripped, you know, down from their nose and from their ears. They're going to have a whole host of things that they're going to be tasting. Food-wise, they might have some taste of some food, where very high doubt it's going to be very pleasant. And things in terms they could touch, they could be touching anything. But one of the main things they're going to be touching is potentially bodies if they're picking things up, or weaponry, okay? Now, these bodies could be live bodies, they could be dead bodies. Obviously, if you're in an army group where you're all alive, you're all huddled right next to each other, so you all can feel each other then. So those are just a few ideas that I came up with, okay, that just sort of get you thinking about that kind of experience of what it would like to be in a war, okay. Now, this goes back to the hint I gave you on the first line. So the elderly gentleman, the little clip that you've just watched, recalls his days as a medic in the war. Now, we know that he's a medic, or you may not have known, but I'm going to tell you now, because he's got a red cross on his hat. And here you can see he's got a band on his arm. Okay, so it's a white band, it's got a red cross. Now, we symbolise that idea of a red cross with the army. Okay, it's first aid. Nowadays, if you go past a pharmacy or past a doctor, it's a green cross. It's like an ad sign, isn't it? So in those days for the war, that was a sign of medic, first aid, okay? And that was clearly his job, although he's fighting in the war. He's got a responsibility of being a medic. He's not just a soldier, okay? He's medically trained to support and help people. So when we consider the skill of amplification, I'm not going to ask you to have a guess at this because it's quite a difficult word to understand. But when we amplify something, imagine if we amplify sound, we make the sound really, 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 really loud. We amplify some writing, we highlight it so it stands out. Now, amplification is a device that's used to add information to a point that you're making. But it's a little bit like when we looked at our English work a few weeks ago, where we over-exaggerate things, we elaborate things, we make them sound 10 times worse than they are. Amplification's along this similar line, so it's giving additional information to a point where we elaborate on it, so we add additional information, we embellish it, so we might repeat words to get the point through to the reader, or even exaggerate. So that's when we're going to use sort of our over-the-top language. So that's like our sensationalist language that we looked at. Now, sometimes for the greatest effect, we use the repetition skill to sort of amplify, so to show off the skill that we want the reader to really be focusing in on. So here is an example of a sentence here, okay? Now, I want to read it to you. Okay, so it says, time spent in the dugout was simply dreadful. Our clothes were always damp and smelled dreadful. The damp air hung around us, choking us with the stench of smoke, sweat and death, whilst the dirt beneath our feet was saturated with blood. There was little to eat, little sleep, little shelter, and little sanitation. The mud-spattered, blood-spattered faces of our friends and allies were little solace in such a dreadful place, so devoid of comfort. Now, this has used the skill of repetition. So I'm going to pick up on some of the words that have been repeated here. So I've got the repetition of the word dreadful. Okay, now dreadful's been used 3 times. So it's honing in on that really negative emotion that reader's going to be picking up on. Got the repetition of the word damp. Okay, so damp's used in there a couple of times to almost give you a context or an understanding of how wet and how horrible it must have been being there. We've also got blood that's been used twice. Now, obviously, because we're talking about war, blood's going to be a very prevalent thing because, you know, people are dying. You know, there's going to be blood around. We also have the repetition of the word little. Now, not little as in small for someone's height, but little as in the amount of something. So there was very little to eat, they had very little sleep, hardly any shelter, and there wasn't any clean sanitation. So that gives you an idea of how little, how very small amount of anything that they actually had. If I change that, I said, well, I had a lot to eat, got lots of food in my cupboard, I get a lot of sleep because I'm relaxing at night, I've got a great shelter, I've got a house, and I have toilets, bathrooms, and options to be able to clean. So that's the opposite. And we've also repeated the word here of spattered. Now, when we spatter something, it's a bit like splattering something. It just goes everywhere, doesn't it? And it just flicks wherever it needs to be. So can you see here how the words are actually repeated for effect? That continuous drumming into that reader's head of being dreadful, damp, blood, little, spattered, almost gives you an idea of how it might have felt to be there, and almost draws you in so that you can almost imagine, almost feel it yourself. So here is another example. Now you have this example in front of you at home. So what I want you to do is just have a quick read of it, and then we're going to see if we can go through and see if we can pick out any words that might have been repeated. So just pause the video and have a read. Okay, so we've got sort of, you know, talking about the first sentence here that gives it away to me. Around me, the air was foul. Now, I can't touch air, I can't see air, and I can't really taste the air. I might get something in the air. So that's going to be more playing on my senses of smell. So I'm looking for words that are linking to the smell of something. So here I've got the acrid smell. Now, acrid smell is just vile. You don't want to smell acrid. I mean, that's almost like rotting fish. That's an acrid smell. Really strong, really pungent smell. We've got the stink of overflowing toilets. We've got the stench, okay, of everything else that was there, and the putrid reek of dead bodies. Now, when something reeks of something, it really stinks, it smells. So here you can see that the word smell what they've done is rather than go, oh, I could smell this and I could smell that and this smell awful and that smell awful, they've actually used synonyms for the word smell. So although we're talking about something you can smell, we've used the skill or the sense of smell, but we've changed the word and used different synonyms to try and describe it. So that repetitiveness of those words. Now, those just aren't weak smell words, like, oh, it smelt bad, it smelt horrible, it smelt nasty, it smelt acrid, it was a stench, it stunk, it was putrid, something reeked of it. We've gone for some really hardcore as synonyms here for the word smell. So what I would like you to do now is I want you to see if you can pinpoint the word that we're looking for that's repeated on your own. Now, it could be synonyms of a word, or it could just be the word that is repeated. It could be more than one word. So pause the video and have a read. You've got this example in front of you and see if you can highlight and find the word that's repeated and what impression it gives you as a reader. Okay, let's see if you spotted it. So I think the word we're looking for here is ugly. Okay, I can see that ugly is repeated here, and then we've got uglier and uglier. We're describing someone who has good thoughts can't be ugly. Now, the word ugly there is to show you that not only can you be ugly on the outside, but you can be ugly on the inside. If you have negative feelings and emotions, you can be an ugly person inside, someone no one wants to be around. But you can still be ugly on the outside and be a nice person inside if you're a very positive, very happy person. But they've really stuck on the idea of being ugly. But what they've done is they have expanded, okay, on how effectively you could be ugly. So you could have a wonky nose, you could have a crooked mouth, you could have a double chin, you could have sticking out teeth like buck teeth. And they describe that you can have an ugly personality as well. So they've given additional information. So they've amplified the idea of being ugly inside and out. So well done if you picked up on that.